There are moments when someone keeps returning to your heart even after you've tried to forget them. You scroll past their name, you silence their memory, yet life keeps finding ways to whisper them back into your story. You think it's coincidence. You call it confusion. But maybe it's confirmation. Because sometimes God doesn't speak through lightning. He speaks through repetition. Through a name that won't leave your spirit. Through peace that feels strangely familiar. Through a love that doesn't beg to be chased, only recognized. Confusion has a way of making noise in the soul. It doesn't whisper, it screams. It fills your thoughts with questions that have no end, looping through every what if and maybe until you can't tell what's real anymore. Confusion makes you feel like you have to decide right now. That clarity is something you must chase. But confirmation feels different. It's not dramatic. It's subtle, almost quiet, like a calm that settles over the storm. You don't find yourself panicking to understand it. You find yourself breathing deeper in its presence. That's how you begin to know the difference. When God confirms something, He doesn't create tension in your spirit. He creates peace, even if your circumstances are still uncertain. We often think that when something is right, it should make sense immediately. But divine things rarely arrive wrapped in logic. Sometimes they come as a soft awareness that doesn't shout, but stays. Confusion will exhaust you, confirmation will anchor you. And yet, the two can feel so close when you're in the middle of it. Because both can come with emotion, both can feel intense. The key difference is that confusion feels like chaos, while confirmation feels like coherence. You begin to notice that your mind may still wrestle, but your spirit knows where it stands. When someone keeps appearing in your life or in your thoughts, it's easy to assume you're overthinking it. You tell yourself you're imagining signs, that it's just nostalgia or unfinished emotion. But what if the repetition isn't confusion? It's divine clarity speaking softly through persistence. When God confirms something, He often allows space for doubt, not to torture you, but to teach you to trust peace over pressure. Confusion demands control. Confirmation invites surrender. And that surrender doesn't mean passivity. It means you stop forcing an answer that isn't ready. You stop trying to explain away what your soul already understands. God doesn't confirm through anxiety. He confirms through the kind of stillness that feels like home, even when you can't see the full picture. It's that moment when you stop needing validation from the outside world, because the peace within you has already spoken louder. Sometimes we misinterpret divine confirmation because it doesn't arrive in the form we expect. We expect fireworks, certainty, and closure. But God often confirms in small, steady ways in conversations that bring you back to the same truth, in people who reflect what you prayed for, in moments where your heart recognizes something before your mind does. And when you stop confusing the stillness of peace with the silence of uncertainty, you begin to see that God isn't trying to confuse you. He's inviting you to trust Him beyond your understanding. When the noise fades and the calm remains, that's not confusion leaving you empty. That's confirmation finding its voice. Repetition has a sacred way of catching your attention. It's easy to dismiss it at first, to call it coincidence or timing or emotional residue. But when something keeps returning, when a person, a thought, or a feeling continues to find its way back into your awareness, it might not be random. It might be divine repetition, a language God uses when words would be too small. He repeats what we refuse to hear, not to frustrate us, but to free us from the patterns of doubt that keep us from trusting His voice. We live in a world that glorifies newness. We crave fresh beginnings, new faces, new stories. So when the same person or situation reappears, it can feel like regression, like we're being pulled backward instead of moving forward. But what if God isn't taking you back? He's bringing you deeper. What if the repetition isn't punishment, but preparation? When the same person keeps showing up in your story, it might be because there's something unlearned, unhealed, or unfinished that only that connection can reveal. Sometimes, God allows the same encounter to repeat until your perspective changes. Because He's not only confirming something about that person, He's confirming something about you. Maybe the lesson isn't about who they are, but who you become in their presence. Are you responding from peace or from fear? From patience or from control? Repetition doesn't just test your emotions, it refines your spirit. It's as if God is saying, until you see this through my eyes, I'll keep showing it to you. The divine rarely shouts, it nudges. It repeats gently but persistently. You'll see the same signs, hear the same name, feel the same pull. It's not to confuse you, it's to realign you. Because faith isn't built through one confirmation. It's built through continued reminders that call you back to what's true. You'll start to notice that the same patterns don't just follow you, they mirror you. The repetition reflects what your heart still needs to understand. It's also important to recognize that repetition doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes God repeats a name, not because you're meant to go back to that person, but because there's something sacred in the reflection they hold for you. Maybe that person awakened a version of you that God wants to resurrect, or a wound He's asking you to release. Divine repetition can come as both comfort and confrontation. It shows you what's unfinished, what's unresolved, and what's undeniable. When you stop labeling repetition as coincidence, you begin to see it as communication. God doesn't waste patterns. He uses them. Every echo, every reminder, every reappearance carries intention. You don't have to chase the meaning. It will reveal itself in time. For now, your only task is to notice, to listen, to stay open. Because when something keeps showing up, it's not always about what's returning to you. Sometimes it's about what's trying to rise within you. Some people enter your life like a mirror, not a mystery. They don't just make you feel something, they make you see something. Sometimes what they awaken is tenderness, and sometimes it's tension. But both are sacred. There are loves that teach and loves that trigger, and the most profound ones often do both. When God keeps showing you the same person, it may not be because He's confirming a forever. It may be because that person carries a lesson your soul can't graduate from until it's fully learned. We like to romanticize divine connection, to believe that if God brought someone into our lives, it must be for permanence. But not all divine encounters are meant to last. Some are meant to reveal. A person can be a catalyst, awakening parts of you that you didn't know existed. The courage to love again, the fear that hides behind your control, the way you withdraw when you feel unsafe. These aren't coincidences. They're invitations to heal. Every person who triggers you is showing you an unhealed part of yourself that is ready for attention, not avoidance. Sometimes we call it love when it's actually longing. Sometimes we call it destiny when it's actually development. And that's where discernment becomes essential. When you meet someone who feels familiar, when your heart recognizes them before your mind can explain it, it's tempting to think, this must be the one. But divine repetition doesn't always mean romantic fulfillment. It may mean spiritual growth. The same person can show up as both comfort and challenge, depending on what season of healing you're in. It's possible that the person who once hurt you is the same one who will heal you. Not through reunion, but through realization. Realization that what broke you before is no longer in control of you, that you've grown, that you no longer need their approval to feel worthy. Love that teaches will expand you. Love that triggers will expose you. Both are valuable because both bring you closer to truth. And so, when you find yourself facing someone again, whether in memory, conversation, or spirit, ask yourself, what are they here to teach me this time? Maybe they're not back to stay, but to show you how far you've come. Maybe their presence isn't a signal to restart something, but to release what's no longer needed. When God keeps showing you the same person, it's not always about rekindling the past. Sometimes it's about reclaiming the part of you that got lost there. When you can look at them without resentment, when you can bless them without attachment, when their name no longer stirs confusion but gratitude, that's when you'll know the lesson has turned into light. There is a kind of love that doesn't rush you. It doesn't chase, it doesn't demand, it doesn't pressure you to decide before you're ready. It moves with quiet certainty, like a river that knows where it's going even when the current bends. That's what divine confirmation feels like. Not urgency, but peace. When God is in something, there's no panic. There's no frantic questioning, no emotional bargaining, no exhaustion from trying to keep it alive. You don't have to fight for what's already aligned with His will. You simply have to stay open enough to recognize it. We often confuse love that excites us with love that's meant for us. Excitement can feel like chemistry, but sometimes it's just chaos dressed as passion. The difference lies in how it affects your peace. Anything that constantly leaves you doubting your worth or guessing where you stand is not confirmation. It's confusion wearing the mask of connection. When something is from God, you won't have to beg for it to stay. You won't have to convince it to choose you. It will feel like exhaling after years of holding your breath. Peace is not the absence of challenge, it's the presence of clarity. It's that subtle knowing that even when things get complicated, your heart remains steady. Love confirmed by God gives you room to breathe and become, not to perform and prove. It doesn't shrink you to fit inside someone's uncertainty. It calls you to grow into someone who can hold what's holy without fear. That's how you know the difference between something you forced and something God formed. When love is divine, it won't manipulate your timeline or your boundaries. It won't require you to lose yourself just to keep the connection alive. It will honor your becoming as much as your belonging. There's a grace to it, a rhythm that doesn't depend on constant reassurance. You'll feel the quiet confidence of something greater guiding it. Not your desire, not your fear, but your faith. And that faith will remind you that whatever is meant for you doesn't have to be chased. It will meet you where peace resides. So when God confirms something, He doesn't do it through chaos. He does it through calm. Through the unexplainable rest you feel when you stop trying to control the outcome. It's the stillness that settles in your spirit when you realize you don't have to perform to be chosen. You simply have to be present enough to receive what's already been written for you. When you stop chasing what drains your spirit and start trusting what restores it, you'll realize that divine confirmation never rushes you. It simply reminds you that what's meant for you will never compete with your peace. Surrender is one of the hardest things for the human heart to practice because it asks us to release the very thing we've prayed for. It asks us to let go, not because it doesn't matter, but because holding on too tightly begins to distort it. When God keeps showing you the same person, your first instinct might be to figure it out, to decode the signs, to define the connection, to make sense of what your heart feels. But surrender means stepping back from the need to understand and allowing God to define it on His terms, not yours. It means trusting that even if you don't know where it's going, it's still being guided somewhere sacred. We often mistake surrender for weakness, as though it's a passive act of giving up. But true surrender is an act of courage. It's the decision to stop manipulating outcomes and start making space for divine timing. When you try to control what God is unfolding, you end up settling for what looks right instead of waiting for what is right. You start forcing doors that aren't ready to open, pushing people to fit into places they weren't designed to occupy yet. But when you surrender, you stop building the relationship from fear. You allow it to unfold in faith. Sometimes God shows you the same person not because he's confirming a relationship, but because he's confirming a lesson in patience. He's teaching you that love cannot be hurried and timing cannot be forced. What's divine doesn't need your anxiety to exist. It needs your alignment. You may think you're waiting for them to change, but perhaps God is waiting for you to soften, to stop seeing love as something to control and start seeing it as something to receive. Surrender invites you to trust that what's meant for you won't require you to chase, compromise, or convince. It's in the space of surrender that the fog begins to lift. The questions that once consumed you lose their urgency because your heart starts to rest in the knowing that if it's from God, it will return in the right way, at the right time, for the right reasons. You stop asking for signs and start listening for peace. You no longer demand closure from others because you found it within yourself. That's the paradox of surrender. The moment you release your grip is the moment clarity begins to take shape. When you finally let God define the connection, you realize it was never about controlling the outcome. It was about cultivating trust. You understand that surrender doesn't end the story. It allows the story to unfold without your interference. Because love, when it's truly divine, doesn't require you to hold on tightly. It asks only that you stay open enough to let it unfold the way heaven intended. There comes a point when what once felt uncertain begins to make quiet sense. The patterns you questioned, the moments you resisted, the person you couldn't seem to forget, all begin to fall into a rhythm that feels less like confusion and more like clarity. This is where divine confirmation transforms into understanding. God doesn't always reveal the meaning in the moment. Sometimes he waits until your heart has matured enough to hold the truth. What felt heavy before now feels holy. The same story you once begged to end begins to show you why it had to unfold exactly the way it did. Clarity doesn't usually come with fanfare. It arrives softly, almost unnoticed, like the way morning light slips through the curtains. It's in the stillness after the storm. When you realize you're no longer asking the same questions, no longer needing the same answers. The ache that once defined your prayers becomes the peace that shapes your gratitude. You start to understand that God was never silent. He was strategic. Every delay, every return, every unanswered prayer was part of a rhythm designed to tune your heart to his timing. When you look back, you see how each repetition was preparing you for recognition. The same person who once stirred confusion now brings understanding. Maybe they weren't meant to stay forever, but they were meant to awaken something that could only grow through their presence. Or perhaps they were meant to stay, but not until both of you became who you needed to be. That's what clarity reveals. The difference between a divine delay and a divine denial. God never withholds what is meant for you. He only withholds it until you're ready to receive it without breaking what he's building. It's a humbling realization when you see how your need for answers once clouded your ability to listen. How you confused silence with abandonment or repetition with punishment. And then one day, you stop fighting what is and start flowing with what's unfolding. That's when the repetition stops feeling like a loop and starts feeling like a lesson completed. The energy shifts. The uncertainty lifts. You can finally thank God, not for giving you what you wanted, but for protecting you until you were ready to understand why he allowed it. Clarity doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. It gathers every unanswered prayer, every delay, every moment of doubt, and arranges them into a mosaic that suddenly makes sense when viewed from a distance. You see that it was never confusion after all. It was confirmation in disguise, slowly becoming clear through time, trust, and transformation. When you reach that place, you no longer chase signs or question timing. You simply know. Because what's meant for you no longer repeats to get your attention. It remains to bring you peace.